Every evening at exactly the same time, the rescued gorilla did something that made the whole family laugh. He ignored the toys. He ignored the floor cushions arranged in a careful semicircle near the window. He ignored the enrichment corner the family had spent 3 weekends building. The rope knots, the puzzle feeders, the hammock strung low between two wooden posts. All of it completely ignored. Instead, he walked straight through the living room with the calm, deliberate energy of a man who just finished a long shift, climbed onto the couch, leaned back against the armrest like he owned the place, and waited, not for food, not for attention. He waited for the remote. Now here's the thing. He didn't know how to use a remote. He didn't even really understand what it did, but he had watched the father pick it up every single night for months, and somewhere in that observant mind of his, he had connected the remote with what came next: the hum of the television, the soft glow filling the room, the family settling in around him, everyone quiet, everyone together. He wanted that. He just didn't know how to start it himself. His name was Kibo. He had come to the family as a young rescue, confiscated from an illegal situation when he was barely old enough to eat solid food. The family, a father named Ray, his wife Sandra, and their 2 kids, had gone through all the proper channels: licensing, welfare checks, specialized sanctuary agreements with local wildlife authorities. It wasn't a simple arrangement. It never is with great apes. But Ray had been working in primate welfare for years, and when the call came about, a frightened infant gorilla with nowhere to go, the answer was never really in question. Kibo arrived wrapped in a towel, eyes too wide, body too still. He didn't make a sound for the first 2 days. The family gave him space, let him observe from a distance, and slowly, very slowly, he began to relax. But he didn't just relax around all of them equally. From the very beginning, he watched Ray most closely, followed his movements, mirrored his posture. If Ray sat cross-legged on the floor, Kibo sat cross-legged. If Ray stretched his arms overhead with a yawn, Kibo would study the gesture like it was a language he was trying to translate. No one thought too much of it at first. Young primates mirror. It's instinct. It's how they learn. What they didn't expect was for the mirroring to become specific, ritual, unshakable. The first time Kibo climbed onto the couch was about 8 months after he arrived. He did it quietly, in the early evening, just hoisted himself up and settled into Ray's usual spot, the left cushion, closest to the lamp. The family laughed. Sandra called the kids in to see. It was adorable, they thought. It was a one-time thing, except the next evening he did it again. Same time, same cushion, same settled-in posture. And the night after that, by the end of the second week, there was no question this was no longer a coincidence. Kibo had decided the couch was his. More specifically, he had decided that the left cushion, closest to the lamp, at approximately 7 in the evening, was his. The family found this hilarious. What they didn't yet realize was that the routine went much deeper than just choosing a seat. Because one evening, Ray got home late, dinner ran long, the kids had homework drama, and by the time the living room was quiet, it was almost 8:30. The family expected Kibo to be fine. He'd eaten, he'd played, the evening was calm. Instead, they found him sitting at the edge of the couch, not settled in, not relaxed, just waiting, still, with the particular quality of stillness that isn't restful at all. He looked at the dark television screen. He looked at the empty cushion beside him. He looked at the doorway. Something about that image made Sandra pause before she turned the TV on. It was the first time she thought, this might mean something more, but she didn't know yet how much more. None of them did. That would come later. First came the funny part, because the funny part was still just getting started. The next evening, Ray arrived home at his usual time. He kicked off his shoes near the door, dropped his bag and walked toward the living room thinking he'd take the couch. Except Kibo was already there, right in Ray's spot, looking directly at him with an expression that could only be described as occupied. Ray stood in the doorway for a moment, then as a joke started slowly walking toward the couch as if he was going to sit down anyway. Kibo didn't move, didn't flinch, he just locked eyes with Ray and held the gaze with absolute, unblinking seriousness. Ray took another step. Kibo's hand reached out and rested firmly on the cushion beside him, not Ray's cushion, the neighboring one, as if to say, this one's yours, you may sit here, but do not even think about my side. Sandra had her phone out before Ray sat down. The video Sandra posted that night got more views than anything the family had ever shared. People couldn't stop watching the moment where Kibo plants his hand on the adjacent cushion and stares Ray down like a landlord politely enforcing a lease agreement. But what the video didn't show, what couldn't fit into 60 seconds, was everything else that came with the routine. Because the couch claim was just the beginning. Around it, Kibo had built an entire evening sequence, and once the family started paying close attention, they realized it had been running like clockwork for months without them fully registering it. It always started the same way. Somewhere around 6:45, Kibo would start drifting toward the living room. Not rushing, drifting, unhurried but directional, the way a person moves when they know exactly where they're going and are in no particular mood to be delayed. He'd check if anyone was on his cushion first. If the coast was clear, he'd climb up, arrange himself, and exhale, a long, low, deeply satisfied sound that Ray once described as the exact noise I make when I finally sit down after a terrible day at work. If someone was on his cushion, the negotiation began. He never got aggressive. That's what made it so funny. Instead, he employed what the family came to call the stare. He would stand approximately 2 feet from the offending person and simply look at them, not aggressively, not loudly, just steadily, with total confidence that this situation would eventually resolve itself in his favor. It always did. Even visitors who didn't know him would eventually shift, laugh nervously, and move. There was just something about the quality of his patience that made it impossible to stay put. He wasn't threatening you, he was simply making clear that time was on his side. Once settled, the routine continued. He preferred the blanket within reach, not necessarily on him, just nearby, available. If the blanket was on the other side of the couch, he'd reach for it with one long arm, drag it slowly toward himself, and then leave it pooled at his side like a king with a robe he can't quite be bothered to put on. He would lean back against the armrest, extend his legs out slightly, not fully stretched but relaxed, like a man who's been on his feet all day, and rest one arm along the back of the couch, head slightly tilted, expression serious. The television needed to be on at this point, not for any specific show, just on. The ambient light and sound seemed to complete something for him. Here's where it got strange in the most wonderful way. He appeared to have preferences, not dramatic ones. He never threw a tantrum over the channel, but the family noticed that certain programs made him more alert, and others seemed to bore him into a gentle doze. Nature documentaries, particularly ones featuring large animals moving across open landscapes, held his attention completely. He'd watch with the focused stillness of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Wildlife sounds made his ears shift. He tracked movement across the screen like he wasn't quite sure what he was seeing but knew it mattered. Loud commercials, on the other hand, were an offense he took personally. The moment an advertisement cut in at high volume, Kibo would flinch, look at the screen with visible irritation, then turn to look at whoever was holding the remote with an expression that was almost comically human, the look of a person silently asking why on earth you would allow that to happen. The remote itself was a source of endless fascination and frustration for him. He understood at some level that it controlled what the television did. He had watched Ray use it thousands of times, but the buttons confounded him. He could pick it up, he could hold it correctly, pointing it at the screen, which the family found remarkable, but pressing the right button at the right moment to produce the right result, that part remained maddeningly out of reach. There was one evening where he got hold of the remote while Ray had stepped into the kitchen and spent 6 full minutes pressing things at random while staring intensely at the screen, waiting for his input to be honored. The channel changed twice, the volume spiked once, and at some point he accidentally opened the input menu and seemed genuinely unsettled by what he'd done. By the time Ray came back, Kibo had set the remote down with the quiet dignity of someone pretending they hadn't just broken something. The kids loved this part most. They had started timing how long it took him to successfully change the channel. The record achieved accidentally was 4 seconds. The average was closer to never. But the funniest detail, the one that got the family every single time, was what happened when Ray got up during the show. It didn't matter why Ray got up. Bathroom, kitchen, phone call. The reason was irrelevant. What mattered was that the moment Ray vacated his half of the couch, Kibo began to slowly, incrementally expand. Not obviously, not in one dramatic lurch, just gradually, a centimeter at a time, sliding, spreading, a leg drifting slightly to the left, an arm stretching a little further across the cushion. By the time Ray returned, sometimes in under 3 minutes, Kibo would be occupying approximately 70% of the available couch space, arranged so naturally that it seemed impossible he had moved at all. Ray would stand there, look at the couch, look at Kibo, and every time Kibo would look back with an expression of total innocence. What? I didn't move. I've been here. This is just how I sit. The family started calling it the creep, as in watch out, Dad, he's going to creep on you again. Ray lost every single time. There was real comedy in all of it, genuine unscripted observational humor that couldn't have been written. But Sandra, who noticed things, had been watching something underneath the comedy for a while now. The routine only happened in the evening. During the day, Kibo was active, playful, comfortable anywhere in the house. But the couch ritual, the specific cushion, the blanket nearby, the television, the family arranged around him, that only happened after the day wound down, when the house got quiet, when everyone came home. She filed that away. Then came the night when she understood it completely. It was a Tuesday. Ray had a work emergency, the kind that keeps you on calls until past 10. The kids had gone to bed. Sandra turned the television on out of habit and settled into her usual spot. Kibo came to the living room at his usual time, climbed onto the couch, but instead of settling into his pose, he just sat, upright, still. His eyes moved to the doorway, then back to the screen, then to the doorway again. He wasn't watching the television. He was waiting. Sandra watched him for a long time before she quietly reached over and rested her hand near his. He didn't look at her. He kept watching the door. And in that moment, the whole couch routine, every funny, stubborn, ridiculous detail of it, looked completely different. The family talked about it later, the way families do when something small cracks open something large. They sat around the kitchen table after the kids were in bed, and Sandra described what she'd seen. Kibo on the couch, upright instead of settled, watching the door in a way that wasn't random or restless. It was patient. It was the waiting of something that knew what it was waiting for. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I know when it started." Kibo had been with them for about 3 months when the first big thunderstorm of the season rolled in. He was still small then, still adjusting, still prone to startling at unfamiliar sounds. The storm came in fast, the kind that rattles windows and turns the sky that particular dark yellow that doesn't look real. Kibo had been in his sleeping space in the adjacent room, but the first crack of thunder brought him to the doorway of the living room, body low, eyes wide. Ray had been sitting on the couch watching something forgettable on television. He saw Kibo in the doorway and just patted the cushion beside him. Not a word, just a gesture. Kibo crossed the room, climbed up, sat rigidly beside Ray for a few minutes while the storm rolled overhead. Ray kept the volume steady, not loud enough to compete with the thunder, just consistent, a kind of sonic anchor. He didn't make a fuss over Kibo, didn't perform comfort in any obvious way, just stayed where he was, solid, present, watching his show. And at some point during the second hour of the storm, Ray looked down and realized Kibo had leaned against him slightly and fallen asleep. He was still so small then. Ray remembered sitting there long after his show had ended, not moving because the rain was still going and the small warm weight against his side was finally still. That was the first time Kibo had slept somewhere other than his sleeping space, and the first time he had fully relaxed in the house. When Sandra pulled out the old videos and photos from those early months, the family sat together and watched them, Kibo small and uncertain, watching from corners always near a wall, then slowly closer, then the couch that first evening. The way he sat so straight, so stiff at first, like he wasn't sure permission would hold, and then gradually, over weeks, the sprawl, the ease, the proprietary lean, the toys and enrichment corner he'd ignored. They tried to give him something to do. The couch gave him something to feel. It wasn't the cushions or the blanket or even the television. It was the arrangement, the togetherness of it. Everyone home, everyone settled, no more movement for the day. To Kibo, who had come from chaos and fear and uncertainty, who had spent his first weeks in this house in a constant low-level alertness that only a frightened young animal carries, the evening couch routine meant that the day was safe. The storm was over, in whatever sense that mattered to him. He wasn't imitating Ray because he thought he was human. He was staying close to Ray because Ray was where the safety was, and the couch was where that happened. Every evening, reliably, without fail. Ray sat quietly after they finished watching. Then he said, "He's not watching TV, he's counting heads." Sandra understood exactly what he meant. Every night Kibo waited until everyone was settled around him before he relaxed into his pose. If one of the kids was still upstairs, he'd glance toward the hallway. When they came down, he'd exhale and settle in a little more. When Ray wasn't there, he didn't settle at all. He sat up and monitored the door because his count was off. Someone was missing. The evening wasn't complete. It reframed everything. All the funny, stubborn routines, the cushion claim, the stare-down negotiation, the slow couch creep, the remote study, they were all expressions of the same thing. I have a place here. I know what happens here. I am safe here. Please don't change it. The blanket kept nearby wasn't about warmth. It was about familiar texture in an armful's reach. The specific cushion wasn't about preference. It was the spot where he'd first fallen asleep without being afraid. The television wasn't entertainment. It was the sound of ordinary evenings, the acoustic signature of home. The family had thought they were observing a gorilla do funny human things. What they'd actually been watching was a once frightened animal build himself a world he could count on. That changed how Ray came home on late nights. He started texting Sandra when he was 20 minutes out, not for any domestic reason, just so the light could be on when he walked in, so the couch was warm, so Kibo could hear the familiar sounds of arrival before the evening settled. He started coming home a little earlier when he could. The next evening after this realization, the family gathered in the living room deliberately, all four of them, earlier than usual. Ray sat down first and looked at the doorway. A minute passed. Then Kibo walked in. He stopped when he saw everyone already arranged on the couch, looked at Ray, looked at Sandra, looked at the kids, then walked over, climbed up, settled into his spot, and did something he hadn't done in months. He rested his head back, closed his eyes briefly, and let out that long, low exhale, the one that sounded like the end of a hard day, like relief, like home. The family didn't say anything, they just let it sit. Then Ray quietly reached for the remote and turned the TV on, and Kibo opened one eye to check he was still there. He was. Word spread the way things do when you live in a connected world, and something in your house is genuinely, repeatably, wonderfully funny. Friends heard about the couch situation from Sandra, who told one person, who told three more. Family members started arriving for Sunday dinners, not just for the food but to witness the Kibo evening routine in person, because no description of it quite did it justice. You had to watch him come around the corner at his usual time, scan the couch, determine whether the situation was acceptable, and then conduct his nightly audit of available seating. First-time visitors never knew how to react when he walked straight past them and began the stare down at whoever had made the mistake of sitting on his cushion. There was a particular quality to the moment when a grown adult, a friend, a cousin, a neighbor who considered themselves quite comfortable around animals, suddenly found themselves being patiently outweighted by a gorilla who was radiating the specific energy of someone who has all night and absolutely no intention of sitting anywhere else. Everyone moved, every single time. The family called it his showtime, because that's exactly what it was. Kibo had no awareness of being observed, or if he did, he considered it entirely irrelevant. The routine existed for him, not for anyone else, and that's exactly what made it so watchable. There was no performance in it, just pure committed daily ritual. The blanket retrieval became a crowd favorite. Visitors would watch him perform the long, slow, one-arm drag across the full width of the couch, and dissolve into laughter at the utter casualness of it. The way he'd pull the blanket in, then barely look at it, then leave it exactly where he wanted it with the efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times, which by now he essentially had. The remote remained a masterpiece of comedic futility. The family had stopped hiding it from him, not because they'd given up, but because watching him pick it up and work through his attempts was genuinely one of the best shows in the house. He had developed a method. He'd hold it up, orient it toward the television with confidence, and press a button. When nothing useful happened, he'd press a different button. When that produced an unexpected result, he'd set the remote down, look at the television with calm assessment, and then pick it up and start again. He never got frustrated. He just kept trying with the methodical patience of someone who is certain the solution exists and is equally certain it will reveal itself eventually. It had not yet revealed itself. The couch creep had become legendary among people who visited more than once. Newcomers were warned in advance. If Ray gets up, watch Kibo. And then they'd watch. And the slow, imperceptible expansion, the leg, the arm, the shoulder, executed so gradually and so innocently that it barely seemed to happen at all, until suddenly Ray would return to find a gorilla installed across 2/3 of a 3-person couch, would earn a response somewhere between delight and disbelief every single time. Ray had stopped fighting it. He'd come back, assess the situation, and with great ceremony wedge himself into whatever space remained, sighing dramatically as he did. Kibo never acknowledged that anything unusual had occurred. He would simply remain in his expanded position, already deeply invested in whatever was on television, and let Ray work out the logistics. But here's what the family noticed. Now that they were watching differently, the full routine, the cushion claim, the blanket drag, the remote attempt, the pose, the settled exhale, only ever reached completion when everyone was in the room. If a kid was upstairs, Kibo would wait. Not overtly. He'd be on the couch, but not quite in his final position, something slightly held back, slightly alert, and then the kid would come downstairs and flop onto the other end of the couch, and Kibo would visibly shift, settle a half-inch lower, relax a shoulder, in a way that was so small and so real it took your breath away a little. He wasn't performing comfort, he was feeling it. Sandra had started taking slow video on those evenings, not to post anywhere, just to keep. There was something in the quality of those ordinary moments, the lamp lit, the television murmuring, Ray wedged into his reclaimed quarter of the couch, the kids scattered in their usual spots, Kibo installed in the center of all of it like a large opinionated family member who had somehow become the anchor of the whole arrangement that she didn't want to lose, because that's what he had become. Not a guest, not a subject, not a rescue project. He had become part of the furniture of their family, in the most literal and beautiful sense of the word. The house organized itself around him in small ways now, the evening schedule bending slightly to accommodate the routine he needed, the couch arrangement never quite changing, the television going on at approximately the same time every night, because disrupting his schedule felt strangely wrong, the way disrupting any family ritual feels wrong. They had built the enrichment corner thinking that was what he needed. They had thought about stimulation, about activity, about keeping an intelligent animal engaged. What he'd needed was a couch and a family on it. The funny thing, and it remained funny, permanently, unfailingly funny, was how completely he owned it. The absolute conviction with which he conducted every element of the routine, no uncertainty, no apology, total authority over his spot, his blanket, his viewing position, and the spatial arrangements of all humans in the vicinity. He had turned one ordinary couch into a throne, and every evening, without fail, he presided over his kingdom with the gravity of someone who has earned every inch of it. Which, when you thought about what he'd come from, he had. He'd come in small and frightened and so still that the stillness itself was heartbreaking. He'd crossed a living room in a thunderstorm and climbed onto a couch and learned that the world didn't end when he relaxed. He'd built, piece by piece, evening by evening, one of the most specific and hilarious and secretly moving domestic routines any family had ever witnessed. Kate, and he did it again tonight. He walked into the living room at his usual time, scanned the couch, found Ray already there, sitting in his spot just to see what would happen. The two of them held eye contact for a long moment. Then Kibo walked forward, placed one hand on Ray's knee, gently, deliberately, and leaned his weight slowly sideways until Ray had no choice but to shift over. He claimed his cushion. He reached for the blanket. He settled into his pose, legs slightly extended, arm along the couch back, head tilted, expression serious. He waited. The kids came downstairs. Sandra came in from the kitchen. Ray, now occupying his regulation quarter of the couch, picked up the remote. Kibo glanced at it, glanced at Ray, back at the television. Ray turned it on, and Kibo let out that sound, the low, long exhale, the end-of-day sound, the home sound, and finally, completely, without reservation, let himself relax. It was hilarious. It was the same as it always was. The blanket pooled at his side, the remote forever beyond his operational understanding. Ray slowly losing real estate he would never fully recover. But here's what it really was. It was a scared little animal who once needed a place to feel safe, who found one on an ordinary couch, beside an ordinary man, in the middle of an ordinary evening that was, to him, extraordinary because nothing bad happened in it. And every night since he has come back to that couch to confirm that it's still true. That the family is still here, that the evening is still safe, that the world still makes the same sense it made last night, and the night before, and the night before that. Though he leans back like he pays the bills. He waits for the remote he cannot use. He slowly, inevitably takes over 3/4 of the couch. And somewhere underneath all of it, in the part of him that remembers what afraid feels like, the part that once came into this house, not knowing if it was real or temporary or safe, he knows that it is. He's home.